Koutou katoa, ko arangi te manga, ko waimakariri te awa, no otatahi aho, ko Joe Cribb tēnei. I just introduced myself using in te reo using Māori mihi, and I told you where my mountain was, I told you where my river was, and I told you where I come from. It's the place where I stand strong. And when I look around the room, you know what I see? I see an enormous amount of women and the men that support them who are standing strong. I also see a fabulous panel here of women who are ready to share their insights with us today. So shall we get going? The topic today is women in leadership in the Commonwealth. And while we're making progress, who feels like it's going a bit too slow? Yeah. The number of women in leadership in the private sector in the Commonwealth has reached 20% in 2018. And yes, that's up from 14.5% in 2015. The number of women on board positions is 25%, up from 23% 3 years ago. But the number of women in our cabinets across the Commonwealth has remained stubborn at 17%. So yes, we can celebrate some progress, but we need to strive if we're ambitious for gender equality. So today's panel, we will share the insights. We're very focused on what works. Let's not talk about the problems, let's talk about the opportunities, let's talk about how to move forward. I'll just spend a moment talking about how today's panel will work. First, I'm going to introduce our amazing panellists. They've got some ideas that they're going to share with you. We're going to do it informally, very sort of talk show host-like, if that's okay with you. And then we're going to throw it open to the floor. Many people will want to say many things, and I'll try to make that as possible as we can. But to our panel, we have the Right Honourable Helen Clark. You don't need to wave, Helen. I think everybody knows who you are. And I'm a bit embarrassed even to read out your bio. Obviously, Helen was a New Zealand politician who served as the 37th Prime Minister of New Zealand from 1999 to 2008. She was the administrator of the UNDP from 2009 to 2017. She's New Zealand's 5th longest serving Prime Minister and the second woman to hold that office, and has been an absolute mentor and icon for many women. My daughter actually said to me, "Look, Mum, there's finally a woman in that seat. It's touched a generation, I can tell you." Our second panel member is Mary Ann Sue Suan Kim. Would you like to wave? There you go. So we are very chat show hosts, aren't we? Mary Ann is a barrister at law, an advocate and solicitor. She's technologically savvy entrepreneur and founder of Builders Biomass, an integrated bioenergy solutions provider modelled on the 3 Ps of sustainability. She's the Vice President of the International Women's Federation of Commerce and Industry in Malaysia and sits on the advisory board of the School of Law of the University of Sheffield and the Industry Advisory of the University of Malaysia. And I don't know when she gets the time to sleep, but well done. Welcome, Marianne.
Thank you, Joe.
Our third panel member is Brenda Trenowden. Can you wave, Brenda? Again, I don't think you need much information. Brenda has more than 25 years' experience in capital markets, investment and relationship banking, with sector expertise in financial institutions. She is a strong advocate for women's economic empowerment and has been recognised with several awards for her global campaigning for the greater gender balance across organisations. And our last but not least panel member is Kitty Chilson. Wave. There we go. Round of applause for Kitty. Kitty is an expert in leadership and behaviour change. She is the co-founder of Boardwalk, who produced the impressive report on the status of women in leadership in the Commonwealth. She is passionate about supporting women in all levels, in all kinds of organisations, to help them reach senior roles, believing that diversity delivers better decisions and better thinking, and don't we all agree with that? Right, shall we get started? I'm sorry, I didn't hear that. Right, shall we get started? Yes. Thank you. Over to you, Helen.
Well, thank you, Joe, and good morning, everybody. Obviously, I can speak from my experience as someone who climbed the greasy pole in New Zealand politics to the top of the ladder, and also from the amazing 8 years I had at UNDP working to support women around the world to enter parliaments and attain economic independence and so on. But before I draw my own experience, I do want to say a word for the women who have not been able to get the first step on the rung of the ladder, right? Because you've got to get on the first step. And I am so conscious, and listening to Zelika this morning reminds us all of the battles so many have to fight, the battles for economic independence, the battle to access sexual and reproductive health services, the battle to have a choice over who, if, when you marry. All of these things matter. The battle to finish one's education as a girl and young woman. The battle to have one's rights under law upheld. So, you know, these are all preconditions for being able to climb any rung on a ladder, and not every woman in the world by any means enjoys that at the current time. The numbers of women in leadership are really pretty woeful. I did a speech in the Gender Equality Month at the Asian Development Bank in March, so I dug out the most recent figures, which tell us that 7.2% of heads of state are women. That includes the Queen, by the way. It includes queens as well as president. Maybe there's more queens than presidents, I don't know. There's 5.2% of heads of government are women, so that means Jacinda Ardern, our 37-year-old woman Prime Minister from New Zealand, is 1 in 20. She's one of the 1 in 20 who are women. And then for members of parliament, globally, 23.3%. And that figure, by the way, the projection from that on the current rate of progress made by the World Economic Forum, which does an annual gender gap report, says it will take us 99 years to reach gender parity in parliaments. Well, this is pathetic, isn't it? So this is pathetic. So I think the message we need to go out of here is something has to be done about it, and fast. So what's going to work? Look, what I saw at UNDP was some fantastic work to support women across the electoral cycle. Firstly, the selection phase. How do you get selected to run? You've got to have political parties on side. Actually, most people in parliaments end up there because a political party put them on a list or in a constituency. So if the parties aren't on side, that's a major problem. We have to convert political parties to see the importance of this. And they may wish to set their own internal quotas or have certain procedures. In 1997, there was a big breakthrough here in Britain when Tony Blair, coming towards being Prime Minister for the first time, said, we're going to have a whole lot of all women-only shortlists. Men can't get the seats because we have to break through on that. That was a decisive moment. But there's also the possibility of going for quotas with legislation by a parliament. Always controversial, right? Always controversial. But Rwanda, which has the highest proportion of women in its parliaments of anywhere in the world, did that, and so have a number of other countries around the world. If you want to make progress fast, do that. That's the reality. So selection, you know, actually getting onto the rung is the first thing. The second thing is the election phase. Two main points I would make here. Old girls' clubs have less money than old boys' clubs. So if women are being elected, they've got to have support. Now, there's been great initiatives in a number of countries. I think Australia, the United States have Emily's List, and they fundraise for women candidates. So the women do need support. And secondly, in a number of countries, they need more physical security than the guys do, because they can be quite vulnerable if they're stepping up to go to places where, you know, women haven't been able to be elected before. So that's important. The post-election phase, you know, particularly when you have a bit of a burst of women coming in, maybe for the first time through quotas, they need to caucus, they need to network with each other. I saw UNDP do some great work supporting the women's caucuses in Parliament. I visited one of those caucuses in Tanzania. They had a quota in place. a number of the women had come in through the quota, and they said they sometimes felt like second-class citizens in the parliament because the men said, oh, you didn't win a constituency, you came through a quota. Well, they came through a quota because the men weren't letting them win the constituencies, right? But, you know, their solidarity with each other was extremely important, and I think we must support that. Look, leadership matters. If I can go back to Rwanda, President Paul Kagame has walked the talk on women's progress in that country up to the highest level. What a pleasure it is to go to that country and meet the high authorities, so many of whom are women, holding very, very senior positions. And we need more leaders in that retreat. Believe me, I went to 4 of those retreats as a Commonwealth Prime Minister. I never heard gender issues discussed once. Could this be the first time, perhaps, they could discuss gender and look around the room? You know, I think back to those summits. I was there from New Zealand as a woman Prime Minister. There was a woman Prime Minister from Bangladesh, and they have alternated women Prime Ministers, as you know. I remember the woman Prime Minister from Dominica, but I really start to struggle after that, to think where, in my 9 years attending 4 CHOGMs, were the women leaders in the Commonwealth. We're probably behind the global average. And that really needs to be the message, I think, come out of this forum. Do something about it, guys. You need the women to be coming up through your systems so they can lead your countries as often as men do. Thank you.
Panellists, have you got any thoughts? I think this theme of quotas will probably come through our discussion, but any thoughts?
It's not easy. I think the first thing we need to accept that changing the default behaviors of human beings is hard work. The great thing is that there's so many ways of doing it. There isn't a silver bullet that you press yes or no. There are so many ways of doing it. And what Helen has told us, that in politics alone, you can make a start through legislation, through women-only shortlists, through a public and commitment and personal commitment from the top leadership. It would not have happened in Rwanda. So that's about accountability. And we've only just started this conversation about how much we can actually do.
That's good.
That's right.
Other thoughts?
I think targets are more voluntary. So like in Malaysia, we have the 30% target. When you talk about targets, the chairman, CEOs, and the nomination, chairman. They're like, okay, we'll just do the barest minimum. And if it's not law, it's not law. It's just a target. It's voluntary. It's not binding. You see, so I have mixed feelings about this because on one hand, you've got incredibly powerful women who says no to laws, no to the 30% laws. Voluntary, yes, but not to laws because it means then we're there like on a tokenism. But then on the other hand, if you look from the other end of the spectrum, you need the law so that things can move. Otherwise, the men are not moving. That's a fact. So our Prime Minister of Malaysia has been very supportive of the 30% women on board, although still voluntary. So we've set up the 30% club. We've got the Malaysian Code of Corporate Governance 2016, which was launched last April, mandating all the top 100 companies on the stock exchange of Malaysia to have their policies disclosed. Otherwise, they have to explain why. And it's become the old boys club slowly disbanding. However, there's a lot of resistance because the Prime Minister and the Minister of Women herself have said, we're going to do name and shame this year, naming and shaming. And I tell you, it was crazy, you know. The chairman, the nomination committee board men were like, what? Name and shame? That's ridiculous, you know? And we've got, you know, even during AGMs of public listed companies, shareholder activism is very big in Malaysia now. And you've got shareholders putting up their hands and say, yeah, Mr. CEO, Mr. Chairman, what are you doing with the 30% women on board? And they're like, did we not declare dividends to you this year? So that's the response. You know.
Sorry, Brenda.
I guess just following on from that, and the first point I'd like to make is it's fantastic to see so many men in this group, because I think it's really important that this isn't a women's issue. But what I'd really love to see is that next time this happens, this panel is in the business forum. Because this is a business and economic issue.
I agree.
So I lead the 30% Club globally, and we are a global campaign to have 30% women in senior leadership through targets. And so we are against quotas, but we see that quotas may be needed as a final solution if targets don't work. So when we set up in 2010, we set a target of 30% women on FTSE 100, which are the biggest companies in the UK boards, by 2015, and we had chairmen sign up to set those targets for their boards. Now, we moved from 12.5% to 26% through voluntary business-led targets, and our whole campaign was about the business case for this. Not about equality, but really talking to chairs about why this is better for economic growth and for their own businesses. We now have targets for CEOs to have 30% women in their senior leadership team by 2020. Now, I like the comments that Marianne made about naming and shaming. We're very clear, we don't name and shame, we work constructively with companies, but sometimes you do need a bit of stick as well as carrot. So our campaign to have CEOs sign up started very slowly. At the end of the summer, we had 2 CEOs from the FTSE 100 and 2 from the 250. I then sent a letter to all FTSE 350 companies inviting them to sign up, the CEOs to sign up, and I mentioned that the Sunday Times was going to publish a list of who was and who wasn't, but that I'd ask them to wait until January so we could engage. We now have 36 FTSE 100 CEOs signed up and 30 FTSE 250.
Very good.
And so, you know, part of it was that naming and shaming. Nobody wanted to be on the wrong side of this. We also had the Me Too movement. We had something in the UK called the President's Club, where there was some very bad behavior. And then we have gender pay gap reporting that's just come out. And so all of these things are making this a very prominent issue. But we also have very strong media coverage of this issue in the UK, and we have done since 2010. The media are always pulling out companies, A, that are doing well, and B, that aren't. And I think that's incredibly important. But what's becoming more important, and Marianne touched on this in Malaysia, is that the 30% Club not only has CEOs and chairs sign up to these targets, but we have a huge investor group. And we've got an investor group in Australia and in our Canadian chapter. And those groups are comprised of pension funds, of big asset managers. Here in the UK, we now have 32 members and almost 11 trillion in assets under management represented. And as Marianne talked about, those investors care about this. They know it's better for business. They know it's better for long-term financial performance, but also from a stewardship and governance issue.
Absolutely.
And so our members actually look at which companies are doing well, and they highlight them, and they go to the AGM, and they congratulate them. But they look at the laggards, and the investors will go in as a group of 6 or 7 and sit across the CEO and chair and say, what are you doing about this? Why have you got an all-male executive team? Or why have you only got 1 woman on the board? Clearly, it's not a meritocracy if we see this. And we want to know what you're doing. And if they're not happy, they vote against the company in the AGM. And I think that is the most powerful means we can have when your shareholders are actually putting you under the spotlight and asking you about this, as well as all the gender pay gap reporting in the press. Companies are having to take action. So I think what we need to do is really hold those companies to account, continue to go back and ask what they're doing, track their progress, and not let anyone just get away with talking or pinkwashing, as we call it.
Yeah, here.
I agree.
Marianne, would you like to share some more about the work that you're doing in Malaysia?
So currently, there's been progress, although slow. So we're standing at about 19% now. There are still some hardcore boards which have not appointed any women on their board yet. This is primarily due to a couple of reasons. So the government has actually allocated a huge budget to train women. I know it sounds quite degrading, right? Since when do men get trained to get on boards, right? But the men were saying, okay, where are the women? You know, so they're looking for the flimsiest excuses to say, where are all these qualified women? Okay, the answer, we've got them in our depository now. Yeah, you want a doctor, a lawyer, an engineer, you've got them all there. So we're like, you know, in this database. So what happened is throughout 2012, the government trained about 1,000+ women to be board ready, so that, you know, the boards will then choose the women that they want. But what happened after that, we had a few first movers, ladies, who were really good. Now, they went on board. There was one lady in particular. She was a banker, but she became very overzealous. You know, she was eager to prove herself, so much so that during board meetings, she upset all the men. I kid you not, ladies and gentlemen. So she brought a lot of old baggage from her old bank over. And she said, no, you need to do this, that. But of course, ladies don't realize, you know, men feel threatened when we start telling them what to do or what not to do. So that gave a lot of bad flavor, if I may say. And then, you know, news around corporate Malaysia spread that, see what happens when we appoint a woman on board. Ouch.
Because she represents every woman, of course.
I know, that's what they think.
Yeah.
Why don't we say that about the US president? See what happens when we have a male president?
Absolutely right, Brenda, I agree. And so it went on a hiatus. In 2013, things went quiet for a bit, yeah. And then it sort of picked up again, the momentum, thankfully. And then what happened was the old boys club slowly turned to an old girls club. It's very strange in Malaysia. So you find similar women dominating the corporate board scene. And I was so inspired by one statement that Helen made, you know, which is, you would defend Jacinta on anything that you do. So it's a lot of mentorship by the senior qualified women to bring up the younger ladies, which is absolutely important because, as you can see, in Malaysia now, it's now dominated by the same group of ladies. They're getting appointed on different boards. Yeah. So yeah, the momentum is there, definitely, but a lot of work still needs to be done. Yeah.
Panelists' thoughts?
Just following on Brenda's point, you know, you get to the stage where you say, well, we put up with mediocre men everywhere. You know, don't women have a right to be mediocre as well? You know, do we always have to be 3 times as good?
Yeah.
You know, the fact that one person who perhaps didn't gel then became symbolic of, you know, that's what happens when you put women on the board. For goodness sake,
Yeah.
this is really quite ridiculous.
Sounds good. Your thoughts?
My colleague, Shahina Janjuha-Jivraj, who can't be here today, led the research that came up with the statistics that Joe started us with, that we are making progress, but it's so slow that some of us are losing the will to live and fight. And yet, the other thing the research came up with was fantastic examples of where things really work and move that dial. The 30% Club is one. Having women leaders who are role models and actually go out of their way to sponsor younger
is key.
women. And we interviewed a couple of women in New Zealand who were where they were because of Helen's influence.
Does everyone understand the difference between sponsorship and mentorship? Because I think it's really critical that, you know, women typically are over-mentored and under-sponsored. And sponsorship is really someone who's wearing your T-shirt and speaking about you and advocating for you when you're not in the room. But these relationships develop quite naturally, and typically because there are more men in senior roles, and because of sports and all kinds of other networking, the relationships develop more naturally with men. But I think really what can make a big difference is really having women have the same sponsorship that men have, finding a good sponsor and having someone like the example with Helen that really, you know, guides you and speaks out for you and puts you forward for opportunities throughout your career. And I think sponsorship is a really critical piece, actually.
And
it's a good point.
in New Zealand, because we now are on the third woman Prime Minister, we have had women Prime Ministers for more than half the last 2 decades. So for young women, this is a very powerful signal. It could be them. It could be their sister, their friend. You know, it is possible. And now we've got up to 38.2% of parliamentarians are women. The 50% seems doable. It seems doable if we keep the push on. Now, I want to make another point about parliaments. The worst system for women trying to break in is the one we inherited from the United Kingdom of the first past the post. Why do I say this? Because the image of the Member of Parliament historically, my country, UK, Australia, Canada and others who adopted this system, was the MP was a man with a female spouse supporting them and children for the photos, right? And so as a woman, you didn't fit that, and that you had to break through that. When I became a Member of Parliament in 1981, I was the first woman elected from Auckland, our largest city with a quarter of the population, since 1941. The woman elected in 1941 was elected a by-election and lost 2 years later. So you can say there were 2 years in Auckland where there had been a woman MP. And I remember all the preconceptions, people saying, oh, she won't do very well here because, you know, they won't like her at the Returned Servicemen's Club and the Bowling Club and this sort of thing. It's a working man's seat, they said. I said, well, hang on. Most of these working men have wives and mothers and daughters and sisters. You know, maybe they might be quite interested. But you had to battle through all that. What made a big change in New Zealand was changing the electoral system. And by the way, it wasn't changed for gender reasons. It was changed because people were sick of governments coming into office saying one thing and doing another. So they thought if they put a chain and ankle around big parties, they could get them to work with others and be more collaborative, which, you know, by and large hasn't been too bad. But a direct benefit of proportional representation, where you have lists, is that parties that don't put women in electable positions on their lists look pretty sick. Because you're going to go out there with a list with all men at the top of it. You're going to say, ladies, vote for us. Doesn't work. And so we went within one election, 1993, where 20% of women were elected under the old system, to 30% in one election. That was how dramatic it was. And that's now, as all parties come on board with, you know, the need to have more women on their lists. We've now got to 38.2, having plateaued around 30 for a while. And I'm very optimistic that this can be done. So we haven't had quotas, but we changed the electoral system. It does make a difference.
Yeah,
Thoughts?
I agree. So this year in Malaysia, 2018, is a Women Empowerment Year. So our Prime Minister has declared this year to be a year where women and girls are pushed to the forefront. So we can unleash the potential of women and girls for them to reach their greatest heights of excellence. We've got increasing of maternity leave from 60 to 90 days now. Developers, what they need to do is to ensure all the new office buildings are retrofitted with childcare facilities. Training for leadership and entrepreneurship, the government is big in putting in money for that. Yeah, because women, when I think it was Melinda Gates who said that when you have money flowing through the hands of a woman, it's managed better. The families eat better, right? And by the end of this year, all government-linked companies and government statutory bodies would have to have 30% women on board. So at least we start from the top to show the example for corporate Malaysia. The judiciary is very well represented, I must say. We have in the federal court, which is equivalent to the Supreme Court, 4 lady judges out of 9. So that's significant. We've also got this year onwards 12 months of tax exemption for women who re-enter the workforce after a 2 years break. And we've got progress on the new Gender Equality Act. And that is really, really important.
Well done.
Yeah.
Sounds good.
I think that the leadership from the top is absolutely critical.
Yeah.
And as a Canadian, I look to what Justin Trudeau has done since he's come in, you know, with his cabinet, but also I recently met with his finance minister, and his finance minister talks about this all the time as an important economic imperative, to the point that they've introduced the gender budget, which means the things that come in the budget have to show the impact on gender. And you know, recently people that were in Canada were talking about the fact that it comes into everything the government talks about now because of the growth and productivity and the importance of this as an economic issue. And so, you know, the change in Canada has been huge since he's come in. And I think, you know, it really does bring us down to the fragility of this around the leader and how much the leader actually buys into this and drives it. So, I think, you know, that's incredibly important. But I think also transparency is critical. You know, and we have had a lot of discussion the past couple of weeks around gender pay gap reporting here. And I think what's really interesting is companies have really had to sit internally before reporting the numbers and think about the narrative and the plan that goes with it. And so whether you believe the numbers or not, whether the numbers are fudged, you can really see which companies have been very thoughtful about putting out good narrative and then announcing what they're going to do about it, which allows people to then follow on and hold them to account. And those companies which have just kind of waited till the end, punched the numbers out, not said much, or companies that have partners at the top and said, well, we don't have to report that, the law doesn't allow it, or those companies that said, no, we want to actually report everything. We want to establish a baseline, and we do want to change. And so I think, you know, any legislation that really puts the spotlight on and brings out that transparency really helps drive change.
Sounds good. Kitty, have you got some more ideas about things that work for women in leadership? And then we'll throw it open to the audience.
We did quite a few interviews with organisations in the public sector, private sector, and indeed in the political sector. And what was absolutely fantastic, and the people in this room who were actually interviewees, was the range, variety, and sheer depth of interventions that work. And you just mentioned one where visibility. Being able to publish your plan internally and externally helps you keep your nose to the grindstone. So having a plan with milestones, publishing that plan, a number of companies have done that very successfully. Aviva, absolutely brilliant in keeping themselves on target by being absolutely brilliant in keeping themselves on target by being open and transparent with their data.
That's fantastic.
Absolutely fantastic. IBM Canada, and Deborah, you will pick me up if I get it wrong, the number of initiatives they have done at all levels, not just one, preparing younger women for leadership. A sponsorship and championing program where someone is actively looking for opportunities that they can put high potential women into to show their stuff. Joining a global IBM leadership program. Going out into schools as volunteers, women going out to say, you can do this, you can be in tech, to help more STEM. So I could go on. They had about 10 separate initiatives. Absolutely brilliant. Another, Vodafone. Vodafone, for women returners after parental leave, they pay 5 days a week salary for 4 days a week work when they first come back to work. Just think about that. Globally. Vodafone was the first company to have a global maternity policy, no matter what the law of the land was. So yes, we do need governments to legislate, Absolutely. We need a clear dividing line between this is right and this is wrong. It is wrong to discriminate against women and girls. It is wrong to have violence, whether it's on the street or in the home. It's wrong, and that's the law. But at the same time, what our research showed is that you do need these interventions at all levels. Government, you need the campaigning groups, you need the 30% Club to be standing there and saying, we can do 30%. And then people start believing it because they see others doing it. You do need women themselves who do reach the top, and there's some very good examples of graduates from the Malaysian program that we found in our research, who when they did get on the boards, they pulled other women up after them.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
The fantastic case study from Uganda, Renette van der Merwe, CEO of Barclays in Uganda. I mean, fantastic. She personally sponsors about 30 women, not just in Barclays, in Uganda and South Africa, trying to find them opportunities to shine. I could go on, somebody stop me. The UK's NHS, I mean, Paul, stand up. Look at your targets. In one of the fourth largest employer in the world, fourth largest employer, you have set a public target of 50-50 by 2020 on your board. And you're close to it. You want to say something about how the complexity, I mean, do, because it's your voice we need to hear.
Sounds good. We might just throw it open for questions. I'm very aware that you've heard an amazing array of things here that we know that works. People in the audience will know that as well, and people in the audience also have questions. The kind of questions we should be asking, we can have women in senior positions, but does that translate into better lives for our women and girls? Many of us also work in small businesses, not in the large corporates. How do we overcome the issues that Helen's talking about at political representation? So let's get real. We really want more women in leadership positions, so let's step it up. What I'm going to do is take 2 or 3 comments again and then throw it open to the panel to respond. So it's probably the easiest way so we can all have our voices heard. But you want to start here? Yeah.
All right. Thank you, Jo. And thank you, Kitty, for that introduction. I was going to ask a question, because I wanted to be the first man to ask a question in the forum. So thank you. UK, and I'm a feminist.
Wow.
I actually wanted to ask a question, to start with Helen, if that's okay, because I was interested in the parliamentary discussion, and you mentioned, the problems with the first past the post system in the UK, which is absolutely right. The other criticism of the UK Parliament is that it's not very female-friendly in terms of, the maternity leave provisions, certainly breastfeeding provisions and childcare provisions. Is it better in New Zealand, and are there other better examples around the world?
Well, we do have a Prime Minister just about to have a baby, so we'll get back to you on that one. Sorry, Helen.
Many years ago, young woman MP had a baby in the course of her service, and I seem to recall there was a ruckus with some men objecting to her bringing it into the lobby for breastfeeding. So, we had to overcome all that. Eventually, we got a parliamentary creche, where women MPs could have their baby, and of course parliamentary staff. The Prime Minister is setting an amazing example. She's having a baby, she's going to take 6 weeks leave, the Deputy Prime Minister is going to be acting. But we did have a very silly debate during the election campaign where some shock jocks on radio put inappropriate questions to our Prime Minister, like, well, are you going to have a baby if you're Prime Minister? Questions they would never have asked a man. Was he planning to have a family? And when asked, challenged with why was this a relevant question, they said, oh, well, she'd have to take leave from her job, and, we're entitled to know if that's going to happen. And, I mean, of course, I weighed in on this because, as Marianne said, I have a policy of supporting Jacinda. And I said, who asks men whether they're so unhealthy they're likely to have a heart attack or a stroke or, you know, wreck their knees and hips jogging and the rest of it. And they might have to go to hospital, and maybe a deputy would have to step up. I mean, for goodness sake. Not that a pregnancy is illness, by the way. It's a perfectly normal part of the life of most women. But anyway, she's having a baby. She will take leave. The Deputy Prime Minister will do the job for 6 weeks, and she'll be back. And young women in New Zealand are very excited about this because it does send a message. It does send a message.
Yeah.
So, look, we're not perfect, but we're getting there.
Yep, sounds good. Over here. Yep.
Thank you. I'm Anne Jones. I'm the Deputy Presiding Officer, Deputy Speaker of the National Assembly for Wales, and proud to stand as one of legislation of a 50-50 representation of men and women. And we did that through a political process. And I'd like to ask the panel, really, how do we improve the numbers of women in a pool for board representation? And how do we ensure that the women that we do put on boards actually then do put something back into the representation pot to allow women to progress? I'm coming to the end of my career, and I'm extremely worried that by the time I want to stand, I'm not standing down just yet, by the way, but if I was to go, I'm beginning to worry about the young people coming behind us, and how do we, apart from mentoring and sponsorship, how do we ensure that we have that full pool?
Do you want to take that question? Does anyone take the question?
I thought Brenda gave some very concrete examples. The investor pressure, for example, if you can generate that, you know, the investors, you know, challenging the management. Where is your commitment to gender equality? I think that's powerful. I think also leadership within the corporations, you know, a front-leaning group that's going to step up and walk the talk and be an example to others. And can I make a third point? You know, I don't know the situation in most countries here, but in my country, the government still has a lot of boards that appoints to. And there's a real opportunity there for the government to set a gold standard of moving towards more equitable representation on the various boards that it appoints to.
Sure. Question over here, thanks.
Valerie Grant out of Jamaica. I'm an entrepreneur, and I'm the CEO and founder for a technology company that functions across the Caribbean. Work a lot with women entrepreneurs as well. Wanted to find out how many countries is the 30% club now touching, and how do you have representation in the Caribbean?
So we have about 8 or 9 countries outside the UK, and we've been slow in growing the international presence because we're just a voluntary group. So we all have day jobs, we're not organized, we have no money, we have no association. I mean, we're all just doing this because we're passionate about it. So we've been slow in growing the international side because we feel it's important, if we have an international chapter, that we can give them enough support. And also we feel it's important that public policy is supportive in other countries, and that there are enough big companies that are willing to get behind the initiative before it starts. So we haven't got representation in Jamaica at the moment. We've got Hong Kong, Malaysia, Ireland, Italy, South Africa, Turkey, US, Canada, Australia. And those have really sort of all got in touch with us and wanted to set up clubs. Some have been more successful than others, and it's not all moved as quickly as we'd like to see. We've got lots of interest from other countries, but we're just very mindful of not growing too quickly if we can't fully support.
Thank you. Yes.
Hello, I am Shatabdi Roy, Member of Parliament Lok Sabha from India. I would like to tell you something about India. We have women defense minister and foreign minister also. And we have maternity leave for 26 weeks. And we have 50% reservation for local bodies. And now I would ask you a question. Have we created a digital platform where women leaders across the world are connected and can share their experiences? And second question, have we created a women leadership fund which can be used to encourage women to participate in election process at grassroots level? Thank you.
Yeah, just take you.
My name is Janet File. I'm a Sierra Leonean British. I'm a nurse and a midwife, worked in the NHS for many years, and I now work as a policy advisor for the Royal College of Midwives. I consider myself to be a campaigning advocate for ending violence against women and girls, and I've done work in that area. But I'm particularly interested in the subject you're talking about in terms of the boardroom. And I wondered, of the 1/3 countries in the world that make up the Commonwealth, how many of those women are affected by the boardroom scenario? And take, for example, in the UK, black and minority ethnic women cannot even get posts on par with their white counterparts. So I'm just wondering how we could kind of get up to the ceiling there, talking about it without dealing with the problems really at the ground level or at the shop floor level.
Yeah, yeah. Great question. We'll take one more over here and then we'll get the panel to respond.
My name is Linda Bowman. I am from Namibia Diverse Women's Association and part of the Commonwealth Equality Network. I'm sitting here as a woman and as a gender activist, and I'm asking myself how the concept of gender has become a fixed concept around physiology only, because gender is not fluid. And the discussion around gender equality is strictly condensed around the fixation around sex, and which means there's an extreme exclusion of women who do not fit the box, who identify as lesbian, gay, lesbian, bisexual, and transgender. And I think that's, as women, it's time that we interrogate what this means, because the discussion is not further to people who are non-conforming within the concept of femininity. And I think we need to take that up as women in order for us to be included within the discussions, within those quotas, and the advancement of equality for all.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, Hannah, would you like to take a moment to respond? Some pretty powerful questions and thoughts.
Well, I
there.
think on the last point, it is absolutely valid, because within each society, women are not a homogeneous group. There are migrant women with issues, ethnic minorities, indigenous women, LGBTI, the rural versus urban issues. So we need to be thinking of, across the spectrum of women and all the richness of that. And we could end up with gender parity, but it not expressing that representative that you've rightly pointed us to.
I think there's a big piece around gender stereotypes and gender norms. And I think it's really important that we start to try and shift that in the media. The Gina Davis Institute has looked a lot about the film industry and how that just reinforces negative stereotypes. Interestingly, there was some work done after Barack Obama was elected in the US, and they said, how was it that Americans were able to elect a black president? And strangely enough, what they found was that because everyone in the US had watched a series called 24 with Black President Palmer, the Americans felt they already had a black president. And they got very comfortable with that norm. And actually, there's a CNN clip where Wolf Blitzer, when Barack Obama is in office, mistakenly refers to him as President Palmer. Shows you how important it is to really change the norms. And so I think, we need to get different people, more diversity in senior roles, and really showcase them and really highlight it. I think that's incredibly important. And so I think that's a big piece. I think the other piece is unconscious biases. There's a lot of training that happens, but then people go back to their biases because it's very hard to overcome a bias. We all have them. And I think what we need to do is create environments where people can openly call out biases and challenge them, because everybody needs someone to help keep them in check with their biases. So I think, the most powerful things we can do are around just changing societal norms and really calling out bias when we see it and trying to help people to overcome it.
Some thoughts?
I couldn't agree more with your point about bias. We can change everything, but the only person who can change what's in here is yourself. And so when one of the questioners said, what do we do at ground level? That's what we tackle at ground level. each individual human being having to change. That's the hard bit of the story. It takes about 6 weeks to learn how to juggle, right? To teach your body to do something takes a lot longer to change your default thought behavior. But you can do it. Everyone in this room can do it with the right willpower and the right attention. However, the other thing that does it is changing the context. And that means changing the environment. And if you have fairer laws for women, guess what? They'll be fairer for men. They'll be fairer for the LGBT community. They'll be fairer for people with disabilities, who really are sometimes at the bottom of the heap in terms of who we prioritize, where we put our resources. They'll be fairer for people with mental disabilities. So I think a lot of the rhetoric has to change as well. That when we're talking about what we're doing it because it's good for business. We're doing it because it's good for the economy, because one of the speakers earlier said if the money flows through a woman, the family benefits, the community benefits.
Absolutely.
And the company benefits, and innovation benefits. So all of these benefits are about empowering human beings, regardless of the package they happen to be born in, or the context they happen to grow up in. And the more you can engage diversity in your leadership, the better that willpower will be allowed to work. So if it works for women, and this is something we've discovered at Boardwalk through our own research, if a company organizes itself to be fair to women, the next step happens without thinking. It becomes fair to men.
There's a lot about management training there as well. And I think a big problem that we find is that companies don't train managers anymore. And actually, you need to train managers to bring out the best in individuals and help them thrive, you know, whatever their talents may be. And there's too much of managers just being given the job, you know, because they're good at sales or something. We call it the concept of the accidental manager. You hit all your targets, you become a manager, and you may not be qualified, you may not be interested, and you certainly aren't given training. And so then you have this concept of merit, and merit is, you know, you think you're pretty good, you're the manager, and someone else that looks like you must be pretty good, so that's merit. And so, you know, it's really subtle, training managers to coach people and to recognize differences, and that, you know, not success doesn't look in one shape or form. And so I think there's another big piece around encouraging organizations to get back to training management as a discipline, and actually rewarding people for being good managers and helping individuals to thrive.
Sounds good. We'll start here and move across. Thanks. Yes.
Right. I'm Joyce Watson. I'm Vice Chair for Commonwealth Women Parliamentarians and Chair of the BIMR region. And as you can tell, I'm from Wales and representing the Welsh Assembly. We, as you've already heard, were the first in the world to have 50% representation under the first past the post system. And that happened simply because our party determined that we would pair and twin the constituencies, and there were 40 of them, and they became 20. The men and women went through exactly the same system to be selected, and the same system to be supported at election time. What concerned me about that was, in the years that I've been around politically, which is quite considerable, I still hear people say that it was an unfair system to the men, and also questions about the quality of the female candidates, even though they went through exactly the same system. So in order to fast forward and prove our worth, women have been holding senior positions in cabinet, not the usual positions that they would hold, and made legislation that is somewhat groundbreaking. And I think my question here is, it isn't about where women find themselves necessarily, but once they find themselves there, what they do with those positions, and how they therefore legislate to help all those women who somehow are relying on them. Cabinet, not the usual positions that they would hold, and made legislation that is somewhat groundbreaking. And I think my question here is, it isn't about where women find themselves necessarily, but once they find themselves there, what they do with those positions, and how they therefore legislate to help all those women who somehow are relying on them to do just that.
Good question.
Thank you very much. My name is Vanessa. I'm a lecturer in organizational psychology and leadership at Birkbeck University of London. The research shows us that implicit leadership theories are formed very early. And while I agree that there has to be a lot of political will from the top, I am thinking, regarding rhetoric and education, shouldn't we be thinking about early intervention, targeted leadership education for girls and young women at a very early age? And boys.
And boys.
And the fathers, and all the men. Because decades of research show us that ILTs are formed very early in life. And so if we begin to program the images of leadership, change that image from, pardon me, white, male, strong, ruthless, to more livable forms of leadership to which our girls and young women can aspire from a very early age. Shouldn't that be a long-term strategic goal we should be pushing at this stage? Thank you very much.
Great question.
Yeah.
And we've got one over here.
My name is Grace Alexander once again, and I'm a disability advocate. I'm the CEO of Start Children Initiative, both here and in Nigeria, and Every Woman Matters. There's some women who are really discredited when it comes to leadership, and these are women and girls living with disability. So there's a huge gap between what the society constructs as women that are normal and women that are, they look, or the way they look, or the way they speak, or their behavior, they see them as abnormal. So, but then, I would say from my experience, I've seen women who are living with disability, whether their disability is apparent or non-apparent, that they are smart and savvy. Is it not high time we start actually including in women leadership? And when we talk about women, it doesn't mean because you look differently, you are not a woman inside you. So it's high time we start bridging the gap. And how can we bridge the gap? Because if 1/5 of the women population are living with disability, then that means by 2030, we might not even achieve that we're leaving no one behind. So it's high time there is a fair representation of women and girls who are living with disability when it comes to leadership.
Fabulous. Fabulous questions. Panelists?
Just responding to the question from Wales, there is some evidence that once you get to a critical mass of women in your parliaments, you do start to see more women's issues taken up in legislation, whether it's on, access for services for sole parents, whether it's dealing with issues like domestic violence, which have been neglected. But there is some evidence around this. Now, what I think women parliamentarians and indeed ministers need to be pushing very hard is for a gender lens to be applied across all areas of policy and budgeting. Actually, in developing countries, the concept of gender-based budgeting is quite well established. Probably in the West, we've got a bit to learn from this, although by the sound of it, Canada has moved some way on that. And by the way, both Canada and Sweden have prime ministers who say we're a feminist government. They're really setting the pace on that, which is encouraging. But you need that gender lens on things, which can look at whether policies are fair. I'll give you an example of the student loan system in New Zealand, which when it was set up was quite extortionate, really. The rates of interest were horrible and accrued. And the projections showed that most women would never pay off that loan before they died. Well, who wants to carry a loan to their grave? None of us, actually. we like to be able to discharge our debts, but it wasn't right. And one of the things I was proud of from our time in government was we said, look, you know, we just can't go on like this. We've got to have a scheme that's affordable. We went to a no-interest system. If you stayed in New Zealand, a major commitment to the country. And that was very, very good for women. If you go to policies like you know, paid parental leave, the truth is most men don't take as much of it as women do, but it's a major thing for women to have a statutory entitlement to paid parental leave, and whatever employers can do then to top up on that is a bonus, but you need the basic minimum for women to have the real choice as to whether they are working or at home full-time. Provision for a good level of paid support for early childhood care and education is also very important, because many women on lower incomes will say, well, by the time I paid for the childcare, you know, I'm not actually any better off at all, and yet they can't maintain their income and work path if they don't get back to work. So I'd really urge that all women in a position to influence policy say, let's look at everything through a gender's lens. A little thing that was done from the outset of the Women's Affairs Ministry in New Zealand, which Jo used to lead, was that all cabinet papers, the Ministry of Women's Affairs comments on them. It's kind of basic, isn't it? But maybe not every country does that. Maybe not every country has a women's ministry or unit that does this, but it ensures that at least a women's perspective has been run over things.
That's it. Yeah. I was just looking at some World Economic Forum reports and statistics, and it's interesting to see that the most inclusive advanced economies, the top 10 countries, and they're all pretty similar, you know. And New Zealand ranks #1 for least corrupt countries. And then if you look at gender equality, again, top 10, and you've got your Scandinavian countries who has reached the 30% mark. So if you actually look at the correlation, it links back to the bigger picture that we're all here for: people, planet, prosperity, peace, and partnership. So if we actually canvas in and corral women and girls into our economy, into our businesses, from all walks of life, then you can actually see the business case. And it's good for not only our families, for the communities, but also for our future. Yeah.
That's good. Very good. Any thoughts? We had some interesting questions about women and disability, particularly.
All I want to say, I think you've hit the right note. This is about human beings, and enabling human beings of all kind, regardless of where they are and who they are, to fulfill their potential, to have the basic rights, to be free from fear, to be free from want, to be able to eat enough and have enough of a warm home so they don't have to worry. And if you have a country where that isn't possible because of corruption, because resources go to those already in power rather than to the weakest, if you don't have the safety nets, everyone suffers, and the weakest suffer most. The old, the young, the disabled, the people with some kind of difficulty that in that society is deemed to be bad, and that could be the colour of your skin or of your eyes or how you present yourself in your identity. So if we keep thinking that this is a human issue and avoid the trap of stereotyping, oh, this is about this community or that community. It's about everybody.
And I think the point, you know, about children and going back into schools and really, you know, affecting models of this, research has shown, I think, that these biases come in at about age 6. So you've got to go right back.
2.
Really?
The recent research says that at 2 years old, a toddler who can't articulate it, looking at a video of bullying behavior, expects the bully to be given more resources than the bullied.
Mm.
2
There you go.
years old. And how many people in this room have heard a 2-year-old say it's not fair? Right? Who taught them what is fair? It starts from the time that the brain has stopped growing and is starting to prune and understand its environment.
So that says there's a lot to do, going back to schools, about school books and how they teach. I don't know how many people have seen the book Goodnight Stories for Rebel Girls.
Yeah.
But I mean, my daughter's 15 and we still read one of those each evening just to keep overcoming what's been taught in school and saying, look, these are some examples. I think also to the point about people starting to come back and saying men are being discriminated against. Well, there's a great video everyone should watch, Michael Kimmel's TED Talk on why gender equality is good for everyone. And he uses the quote, he says, especially middle-aged white men have benefited from the biggest affirmative action program in the history of the world. And it's called the history of the world. So I think, we need to challenge some of that. The stats don't bear this out. And this is perception. So we've always got to have data and stats, I think, that come back and challenge people who say these things.
Right, let's take another round of questions at the back there.
Mandy Marshall from Restored. Many people in the Commonwealth will have a faith, so my question to the panel is how addressing the elephant in the room of actually faith leaders can prevent women in leadership, and what is the panel's experience of working with religious leaders to bring about a positive change?
Great question. You've got one here? Yep.
Yes, Elizabeth Dowd, BPW UK. Why not give organisations, corporations, small businesses recognition if they achieve Sustainable Development Goal 5?
Good question.
And get benefits from it as well.
Fabulous. Yep, over at the other end.
Hi, Bev Esslinger. I'm elected city councillor from Edmonton, Canada. And I am curious, one of the challenges that we're facing is women are not staying, they're getting in politics, but they're not staying nearly as long as the men are. And I'm wondering what we can do to support them. And I'm curious if there's any work, how do we support women that are getting on boards to stay on boards because they may have some resistance, and how are we supporting them to stay there?
Great question. And over here?
Hi, my name is Philo and I'm from Fiji. And I have a question regarding sponsorship or mentorship of young women or young women who are trying to break into leadership positions or spaces. And my question to the panel is, what does it look like for you practically day to day in terms of how you mentor younger women or women who are just emerging into these roles? What does it look like? How often do you meet? Who approached who? What does that look like practically for those of us who would be interested in considering a relationship, a learning relationship of that nature?
Great question. Okay, let's go first.
Just on the length of time women are in politics, often, they're in the more marginal positions when elected. They might be on the low rungs of the list, if there's a list system. They might be in constituencies that weren't quite safe for their party. So when the tide goes out, they go out with it. So that, again, is an issue of, are women getting a fair shake at the, quote, safer seats? I mean, I had a long parliamentary career of 27.5 years in what was a safe seat, and I worked hard to keep it that way. But the reality was, you would see other women, come and go who had fought marginals, and then the tide would go out and take them out. So we need to change that. High on lists and in the safer seats. On the issue of mentorship, I've seen, and we've probably all got examples, but the YWCA in Auckland does fantastic work with young women from in the low-income neighbourhoods and schools, from around age 14, 15, 16, 17, standing beside them, assigning a mentor who they can really have a very intense relationship with in the effort to ensure that the girls see that they really have the potential to go somewhere, and the mentor will work to help them articulate that and their goals and aspirations. So there's any number of such programs, but I want to give the YWCA a shout out for the good work that it does.
Can I
Yep.
Just to add to that, the 30% Club here has a cross-company mentoring scheme, which has been incredibly successful. We started 5 years ago, I think, with 6 companies and about 30 individuals. We've now got well over 100 companies and over, I think, 1,200 individuals involved. And the way it works is that companies put forward mid-career level women and then senior people to sponsor, and we computer match them so across industries. So we've got companies from Marks and Spencer and big banks through to the British Army and the Environment Agency, law firms. I've been involved in the program for 5 years, and we find we have both mentoring and reverse mentoring works very well. But I think the difference is, and I mentor a lot of people, probably about 15 women and men that I mentor, and I sponsor a couple of people as well. So the people I mentor, we have regular once-a-month sessions where my mentee comes and brings issues or something that's happened at work, or sometimes we speak in between if there's a big meeting that's going on with her boss. And I listen, and then I give her advice, I ask her questions, I try and encourage her, and it's a very good relationship. And I learn a lot about the issues she's facing that maybe some people don't want to tell me in my organization, because it's harder in your own organization to be as open and honest. So it's quite a structured program. It goes from September to June. There's meetings every month for all the mentees that have training, but the mentors and mentees meet at least once a month, and it's a dialogue. The difference in the people that I sponsor are that I chose them because I saw them as high potential, both women and men, and I thought that they needed more of a push to get their career going. And so, I will often highlight opportunities and say to them, you should go for this. You would be really good at this job. And I will go and speak on their behalf and say, look, I know this person well, and I think they should be given that opportunity. In return, they are incredibly loyal to me. They give me air cover in the organization. They help keep me in touch with what's going on. And when I need something or need someone, I know I can rely on them anytime. And so it's a really good two-way relationship. And the people I've sponsored have done well, and they've progressed. And the more people I sponsor in my organization, the more of a network I have through the organization of good people I can call on and I can rely on. So it's a good two-way street, but it has to develop quite naturally. And in this case, I've chosen people, but sometimes people will come through and they'll want you to sponsor them, and so it can work both ways.
That's good. Okay, this is probably going to be our last round of questions, but we have lunchtime and we have lots of days over the while to go through. So I'm going to start at this end. Yeah.
My name is Jolene Mataile from the Kingdom of Tonga. Before I go into my question, I'd like to remind that the Women's Forum that from Sri Lanka, CHOGM, I was the only transgender woman and the only LGBT person that was at the forum at CHOGM, fighting for women's gender equality. And mentioning that, I'd like to resound what Linda, my colleague from Africa, said about the fixation of the gender equality. But really, my question is directed at Marianne. You say that your Prime Minister is supporting gender equality. Will your government or your Prime Minister recognize that there are transgender or trans women leaders that can be good leaders in your country? Because a lot of my colleagues from Malaysia are suffering from being put on the side, not being recognized from your government. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks.
I think that's a very, very good question. I'm puzzled myself as well, honestly. I cannot speak on behalf of the government on this, unfortunately, but I hear you, I'm a lawyer, I hear you, and I believe in equal rights for all, irregardless. The thing about Malaysia is we're very diverse, so we've got a mixed bag of different cultures, different races, and different religions. It's very interesting if you delve into it deeper and go back to history. We actually adopted the common law system from Britain, yeah. Britain is a very good example. It's set very good laws in our country. But then since we gained independence, we had separate systems now. So you've got your Sharia law for Muslims and the civil law side. But of course, all commercial, contractual matters will still go back to civil. But in terms of deaths, marriages, religion, for Muslims, it will be the Sharia. So both ways running concurrently. And you've got the politicians, very interesting. They're very powerful from both sides. And they will take anything. I'll be very careful here because we've just passed the Anti-Fake News Act in less than a month. When the Law Marriage Reform Act has not been enforced yet, even though passed in Parliament. Okay, that's for another story. And you've got cases of unilateral conversion and this and that. But to answer your question, the LGBT community in Malaysia is very vibrant. They are qualified, they're vibrant, and they contribute to the economy. So you're right, it's in the process. There's a lot of talk going on. There's still a lot of struggles faced by the LGBT community in Malaysia. But you've still got the systems which is entrenched there with strong religious and cultural beliefs. That one, I believe, takes a little bit more time to gradually, change. It's not an overnight thing. But in time to come, I believe there will be progress.
Thank you.
Thank you. Rina Laivera, I'm the National Commissioner for the Promotion of Equality in Malta. As you know, Malta is leading in the granting of human rights for LGBTIQ persons. We were also, 2 years ago, the first to propose the Women's Forum, which we are now attending, and we are very glad, obviously, to see it as part of the Commonwealth's agenda for now and for the future. Now, to come to the discussion, we have heard about gender stereotypes. I totally agree. We have heard about how we need to change on a personal level, and we need to change legislation and the environment.
Yeah.
But even this morning, we have not been talking about what is happening in the media, what is happening on social media, which is so, it really attacks all our gender equality mentality and messages that we're trying to put through with role models, with actions, with legislation. We are not really giving enough attention to the stereotyping that is happening on the media. We see women as victims, as subordinates, and if we once see a woman who has been given a high position, headlines, which means it is proving that women do not usually get high positions. So what are we doing about this? Children's education, just mentioned. We have to start in the schools. We have to start on the programs. We have to see what's happening on the social media. Gender stereotyping is everywhere. Wherever you look, and it keeps propagating itself because of the algorithms, I'm told, on the internet and how it works. We keep propagating these gender stereotypes. And this is the root of the cause. We can have a lot of legislation. In Malta, we have proportional representation. Do you know, you can look at the list, 13% women in parliament. We have been trying for long to change it. Now we're talking also about quotas to try and bring about change. As we were saying, quotas are looked at as being undemocratic, as if the status quo is democratic. I can't understand this. When I ask people, so you're happy with the status quo? What do you mean? I say, but is that democratic? No. So what are you going to do about it? We're talking about men thinking that they're great and women don't know anything about it. Well, what about our economic crisis worldwide? Who was responsible for that? Mainly. Let's be fair, mainly.
That's good. You raised some fabulous points. Thank you.
I think
we'll
this
move on
is
to
an
the
issue
next
which
point.
we really need to look into.
Thank you.
Wendy Momen, EBBF, that's Ethical Business Building the Future. First of all, briefly, can I just congratulate the panel and the chair, I have been attending these kinds of events since Beijing. This is the very first event I have attended where you've actually answered the questions, where it's been thoughtful, and you've really paid attention to what people are really concerned about. And it's been one of the most interesting panels I've ever been at. And I thank the chair also for enabling that to happen. Really brilliant. Two small points. One is ageism.
Yeah.
Will short, fat women ever get elected to anything? And secondly, the other one is really around that same question, body image, which dominates so much of the way we even vote.
Thank you. Thank you for your questions. Sorry. Yeah. I'm just taking one more question over here, and then I'll throw to the panel.
I'm Ranjana Kumari from India. I'm Director for Center for Social Research and also, of course, a frontline feminist in my country. I have just a question about, looking at the way deficit of gender in democracies across the globe is really real. And we have been experimenting with this system of governance for a long, long time. So isn't it time to start questioning the way the democracy, once in 5 years we vote, and then the people who come to power are all these men who really don't care. System is not inclusive. So is it time to start raising some questions about the system of governance itself? Thank
Fabulous.
you.
Wonderful
and this
questions.
is to Helen
Powerful
Clark.
questions. Powerful questions. Team, who's going first?
Well, I think the points on the media are well made. Let's not put everyone in the same boat. There are some quite good efforts, I think. I mean, I hesitate to raise the BBC because of the pay issues, but about 3 years ago they started an initiative to have sort of 100 women that they'd bring together and really do a big push. And it wasn't just a one-off, they've stuck with it. So the quality press often is quite helpful. The tabloids are a problem. Do we still have the page 3 girl in the Mail or whatever? I don't know. It sort of sums it up. Brenda did mention the film industry and Gina Davis's efforts to look at the way women are represented in film and television. And I think that's been a good campaign. But yeah, what can we do? Sort of call for better. You can't legislate for what the media do, but you can, I guess by the choices we make, what we watch, what we comment on, what we expose, what we advocate for, we can make a difference.
I think some of the media outlets we've been working with have started to say whenever they have an expert, subject matter expert come on, they need to see as many women as men coming on and commenting so that we don't just see women in the fashion pages or, wondering what Kate Middleton's dress or Meghan, Markle's dress is going to look like. It's about women talking about their expertise. I know that Christine Amanpour at CNN always tries to get women to come on and speak about the topics she's doing, and she's really trying to drive a lot and is a great role model as well, I think, for women in journalism. Sky are doing more of this. I think the newspapers have got a little bit of catching up to do. The FT have recently been convening women to come and see how they can change that and they can get more women to come forward. But what I hear from the press is that often women don't want to put themselves forward. So there are lots of great subject matter experts out there, but I think that there's a bit of both sides. We need the media pulling them through more, and we need to help encourage other women to go and be comfortable to go and speak to the media and be showcased and highlighted. So I think there's a bit of both there.
I agree with Brenda. I think visibility is very, very important. I was just talking with one lady back in Malaysia, and she's also doing a lot of work in promoting women on boards. And in her website, and the sort of monthly circulars, they actually feature like different star women, which is a great initiative. But I asked her, do you send this out to the public listed companies? And she says, no. I say, okay, but that's where your target audiences are, These men, they won't be accessing your website to, actively look and read about this lady. So you've got to find a way to connect with all of these chairmen and to show them, hey, you know, we actually have such capable, qualified, and highly competent ladies who can add value to your boards. So I think it's very simple, something small, but it makes a lot of difference because I say it's now you're letting us ladies see again who are the star performers we know, you know, but the men do not know. So it's a lot to do with visibility. That's important. And yep, absolutely, coming in front of the media, you know, talking about it, I think keeping the conversations alive, that makes a lot of difference.
Now, I've been giving, there's a lovely man up there with a big sign. He is smiling, but he's starting to not smile, which means our time is coming to an end. We have 2 minutes to go, and then we have an absolute treat for you. We're going to have our photo taken together. Are you excited about that? Yes, bring it on. I'm afraid we actually don't have any more time to take your questions, but everyone is around over lunch. Let's keep the conversation going. And now I haven't actually prepped my team here about this, but I'm going to throw it over to them. If I gave them a magic wand and handed it to them, what would they use it for if they're going to increase the number of women in leadership? And I'm talking now because I'm giving them a second to think about what they would do. Is that okay? But let's see what they come up with, because again, it's about action. We can talk, we can read the statistics, but we've actually got to do something, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, so who wants to go first? Who wants the magic wand?
Well, my magic wand is I would like those 155 countries identified by the World Bank as having at least one discriminatory law against women to get rid of it. That's my magic wand.
What are you going to use your magic wand for?
Well, my magic wand would be to accelerate laws to promote gender equality and to enforce the Law Reform Marriage Act bill. You know, one very important bit on there is that currently maintenance for children stops at the age of 18 in the current laws. If you ask me, it's too young, because at 18, children have just gone on to universities, right? So in Singapore, it's 21. Yeah, that's interesting. So by 21, you would have completed your first degree. So this bill, which has been already passed in Parliament, but not yet enforced. And then when I go to court, you know, my opposing counsel, usually acting for men, would say, hey, no, you know, we're just paying up to 18. See, because that's the law. So yeah, my magic wand, enforce the law. You know, we need that. We really need that. So the bill already says that, okay, until you get into higher education. So that would cover the degree.
Yep, fabulous.
My
so superpowers.
Yeah, superpower would be that men all take this up as a business and an economic imperative. This is about women and men working together because it's good for everybody. So I want to see many more men take this up as a real imperative.
My magic wand is about being open and honest, getting the data and publishing the data, being open and honest about who is accountable for making things happen, whether it's at government level, whether it's at organizational level, whether it's in private companies, whether it's in charities. Name the people who are responsible and measure what they do. And finally, it's about visibility. It's about individual visibility. Stand up and say, I am a feminist. I do believe that people are equal and I'm going to fight for it. And it's about visibility, like the gender pay gap, like whether you belong to the 30% club or not. And finally, it's about resources. None of this is going to work unless governments and organizations put their money and their time and their attention where their words are.
And just to make a concluding statement, which is incredibly hard, because aren't they amazing? Can we just give them a round? What a fabulous team here. And I'd like you all to give yourself an absolute pat on the back. Can you do that, please? Because what a fantastic questions and fantastic audience. But I just want to say I've given the team here a magic wand and pixie dust and fairies and superpowers. But that's not what it's going to take. It's going to take us. Do we have to get a bit more angry? That's my final word. Thank you. Now, who is helping me with this photo? The photographer.
Can I, while you're doing that, I have one proposal which is about visualness. By the way, I'm a feminist. So, the flag's brilliant. But if you go around that Westminster Square, no woman yet. So why not one of our first women prime ministers in the Commonwealth? You know, which is not Margaret Thatcher, actually. So, you know, you can go international. But I think that should be a serious, easy outcome.
Yep, easy. Let's get some pictures. Sounds good. Can you stay for 30 seconds?
Yeah.
I don't know. We just have to take that.
And I'm going to need a selfie with Helen going back to the ANZ. Yes, you will. I'm going to need a quick photo of the two of us.
Ladies and gentlemen, just to facilitate the photograph that we would like to take, could you please all stand and turn to face the back of the room?
Probably only got about 30 minutes. Probably need to get
Ladies and gentlemen, if you do your best to squeeze into the middle, that'll help the photograph. Thank you. I did always say this wouldn't work. I did always say this wouldn't work. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Just so you're aware, the catering areas are now open on the 4th floor in the St James and Westminster suites.